The week I got married, I didn't tell my husband about the trust fund. Not because I didn't love him. I did. I do. But I'd watched my mother spend 30 years being financially dependent on a man who knew exactly how much leverage that gave him, and I swore I would never be in that position. So when my grandmother passed 2 years before the wedding and left me her investment portfolio, managed through a trust, conservatively valued at just over $580,000, I kept it quiet. I told myself I'd bring it up eventually. After we'd built something solid, after I knew for certain what kind of man I'd married, turns out I didn't have to wait long to find out. His name is Felix. Felix Drummond, 38, project manager at a mid-size construction firm outside of Columbus, Ohio. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming, argued about whether the Kansas City Chiefs would make the playoffs, and somehow ended up talking until 2 in the morning. He's the kind of man who remembers how you take your coffee and shows up with it on bad days. I fell for him slowly, then all at once. We got married on a Saturday in late September. Outdoor ceremony, 60 guests. His sister caught the bouquet. It was exactly what I wanted. His sister's name is Maureen. I should have paid more attention to the look on her face during the reception. Not the smile. She smiled plenty. It was the way her eyes moved around the room, calculating, like she was already thinking about something other than the wedding she was attending. I filed that observation away and forgot about it for exactly 11 days. On the 11th day of my marriage, my mother-in-law called and asked if she and Maureen could stop by the house. My mother-in-law, I'll call her what she is, had always been polite to me. Warm even, in the way that people are warm when they want something. She brought food when we visited, asked about my work, remembered my birthday. Felix adored her. I had no reason on paper to distrust her. But Felix was at work when she called, and she specifically asked to come by while he was at work. I said yes. I made coffee. I told myself I was being paranoid. They arrived at 10:30 in the morning. My mother-in-law had brought a coffee cake from the bakery down the street, the kind of gesture that's designed to make you feel like everything is casual. Maureen was carrying a leather tote bag. She set it on my kitchen counter like she owned the place. We made small talk for maybe 4 minutes. Then my mother-in-law folded her hands on the table and said, "We wanted to talk to you about something sensitive." I waited. "The family has been going through a difficult period financially," she said. "I don't know how much Felix has shared with you." He hadn't shared anything because, as far as I knew, there was nothing to share. Felix had a stable job. He paid his bills. He'd never mentioned anything about family financial trouble. I kept my face neutral. "He's mentioned some things," I said. A small lie, just to see where she was going. She nodded like she was relieved. "Then you know about the business." I didn't know about any business. But I said, "Why don't you tell me your perspective?" What came out over the next 20 minutes was this. Felix's father had started a small landscaping company years ago. When he passed, Felix and Maureen had inherited it jointly. Maureen had been running it. The company had taken on debt. She framed it as unexpected setbacks, but the number she eventually mentioned was $190,000. The bank was not willing to extend the loan. They needed to either pay it down or risk losing equipment and contracts they'd spent years building. "We were hoping," my mother-in-law said carefully, "that you might be willing to help the family through this period." I looked at her. I looked at Maureen. Maureen was studying her coffee cake. "What does helping look like?" I asked. That's when Maureen reached into her leather tote. She pulled out a document. Several pages paper-clipped together with a sticky note on the front that said, in neat handwriting, "For Nora's review." My name. On a document I had never seen before that had apparently already been prepared in anticipation of this conversation. "It's a loan agreement," Maureen said. "Structured so that you'd be protected. We pay you back with interest. 3 years, fixed rate." It's actually a better return than most savings accounts right now. I didn't touch the document. How much? $150, she said. To start. $150,000. To a business I'd never heard of, run by a woman I'd known for 8 months, 11 days into my marriage. I kept my hands flat on the table. I'll need to look this over, I said. And talk to Felix. Something shifted in Maureen's expression. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the eyes. We were hoping to keep this between the three of us for now, she said. Felix has been under a lot of stress. We didn't want to burden him with a $150,000 financial decision involving his wife, I said. Silence. I appreciate you coming to me, I said, standing up. I'll be in touch. They left the coffee cake. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after they left. The document was still on the counter where Maureen had placed it. I hadn't touched it. I made myself a second cup of coffee and thought about everything I just witnessed. They had come to my home while my husband was at work with a pre-prepared legal document to ask for $150,000 without telling my husband. The woman running a failing business wanted access to money she had no way of knowing I had, unless she'd been digging. That last part hit me all at once. How did they know? I hadn't told Felix about my grandmother's trust. I hadn't told anyone in his family. I had been careful, so how had Maureen known to prepare a document? How had she known to come to me at all? I called my best friend, Deb. She's known me since college, and she also happens to have good instincts about people. I told her everything that had just happened. There was a long pause on her end. Nora, she said, someone talked? I called my attorney that afternoon. Her name is Claire, and I've used her for contract work for years. I told her what happened without editorializing. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Don't sign anything. Don't discuss your finances with anyone in his family, and find out how they know what they know." I spent the next 2 weeks being very quiet and very observant. I didn't confront Felix right away. I know that might be hard to understand, but I needed to know what I was dealing with before I said anything. If Felix was in on it, I needed to know that. If he wasn't, I needed to protect him from whatever his family was doing. I started paying attention to small things. The way Maureen texted Felix more than usual, the way my mother-in-law asked, once, very casually, whether I had worked things out with the paperwork. The way Felix seemed distracted some evenings, like he was carrying something he hadn't put down yet. About 3 weeks after their visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice, professional, identified himself as working with a financial documentation firm. He said he was following up on the trust transfer documents and asked if I'd had a chance to review them. Trust transfer documents, not a loan agreement, trust transfer. I said very calmly that he must have the wrong number. Then I hung up and called Claire. She told me what I already suspected. Someone had been researching my grandmother's trust. It's a matter of public record that a trust exists. What's not public is the balance or the terms. But the fact that this man had called about trust transfer documents meant someone had already begun the process of preparing paperwork to move assets out of the trust. Paperwork that would require my signature. Paperwork I had never been shown or asked about. "This isn't a loan request anymore," Claire said. "This is organized." I asked her what I should do. "We're going to get ahead of it," she said. "The first thing we did was make sure the trust was airtight." Claire connected me with the estate attorney who had originally set it up. We put additional protections in place. Nothing that would take money out of the trust or change its beneficiaries. Just legal reinforcements that made it significantly harder for anyone to initiate a transfer without multiple layers of verification. That process took about a week. The second thing I did was have a conversation with Felix. I want to be honest about how I felt going into that conversation. Scared isn't quite the right word. It was more like bracing. I had built a marriage with this man, I had said vows to him in front of 60 people, including both our families, and I was about to find out whether any of it meant what I thought it did. I made dinner. I didn't make it a big production. Just pasta, the kind we made on weeknights when neither of us wanted to think too hard. We ate and talked about his week, and somewhere in the middle of it, I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm done." He put down his fork. I told him about my grandmother's trust. I told him I'd kept it private and explained why, not to deceive him, but because financial independence had always been a survival strategy for me, something I'd had to build deliberately after watching my mother lose hers. I told him about his mother and Maureen coming to the house. I told him about the document, the phone call, the trust transfer paperwork. He didn't say anything for a long time. "The landscaping company," he finally said. I knew it was in trouble. I didn't know how bad. "Did you know they came to see me?" "No." He said it without hesitation, and I believed him, not blindly, but because of what came next. He pushed back from the table, stood up, walked to the window. I could see the tension in his shoulders. "They came to my wife," he said, mostly to himself. 11 days after the wedding, with documents. "Felix." "No." He turned around. "No, I need to give me a minute." He called his mother that night. I didn't listen to the conversation. I sat in the living room and waited, and when he came back into the room about 40 minutes later, he looked like he'd aged slightly. "She said it was just a loan request," he said. "She said you misunderstood." "I didn't misunderstand the document with my name on it." He nodded slowly. "I know. Did she tell you Maureen had already been in contact with someone about transferring the trust?" He went very still. "I have documentation," I said. "Claire has it." He called Maureen next. That conversation was louder. I heard his voice through the closed bedroom door. Not the words, but the tone. He wasn't yelling exactly. It was worse than yelling. It was the voice of someone who has realized they've been made a fool of and is trying very hard to stay controlled. He came out an hour later and sat next to me on the couch. "She says she was trying to protect the family," he said. "She says she thought you'd want to help, and she was just preparing options." "Preparing options," I repeated. "I know." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Nora, I'm sorry. I didn't know any of this was happening." "I believe you," I said, and I did. What followed was the harder part, not the legal part. Claire handled that efficiently, sending a formal letter to Maureen's contact at the financial firm, making clear that no documents relating to the trust had been or would be authorized by me, and that any further outreach would be treated as harassment. The firm apparently dropped the matter immediately. My guess is they'd been hired on the premise that the signature was forthcoming, and once it wasn't, they had no reason to continue. The harder part was Felix and his family. He wanted to fix it. That's who he is. He's a fixer, a mediator, the person who shows up and tries to find the middle ground. He spent about 2 weeks trying to get his mother and Maureen to acknowledge what they'd done. They never fully did. His mother eventually offered something that might have been an apology if you squinted at it, framed around how much stress the family had been under and how they hadn't meant to put me in an uncomfortable position. Maureen said nothing directly to me for almost 3 months. Felix and I went to couples counseling, not because of anything broken between us. We were, in some ways, stronger after this than we'd been before, because we'd had to be honest about things we'd been quietly carrying. But because we wanted to make sure we were building on solid ground. Our therapist, who I liked immediately, said something in our second session that stayed with me. The people who survive hard things in a marriage are the ones who face them together instead of alone. We faced it together. I want to say something about money and marriage, because I think about it differently now than I did before all of this. I used to think keeping my finances separate was about protecting myself from a worst-case scenario. A backup plan. Something to fall back on if things went wrong, and there's nothing wrong with that thinking. I still believe in financial independence for both partners in a marriage. I believe in women having their own accounts, their own credit, their own economic foundation that doesn't depend on staying in a relationship. But what this experience taught me is that financial transparency in a marriage isn't about giving someone access to your money. It's about having a partner who knows your full picture and respects it. Felix and I have had more conversations about money in the last year than most couples probably have in a decade. I know exactly where he stands. He knows exactly where I stand. We have a prenuptial addendum. Yes, you can add one after the wedding, and yes, you should talk to an attorney about it, that documents what came into the marriage and what we're building together. His family knows now that I'm not a soft target. I didn't come out and say it. I didn't need to. The letter from Claire said everything that needed to be said. Maureen is still running the landscaping company. I don't know what happened with the debt. Felix knows, but I've deliberately chosen not to ask, because it's not mine to carry. They either figured it out or they didn't. Either way, it had nothing to do with me. My mother-in-law and I have an arm's-length relationship now, polite. Holiday dinners, birthday calls. She brought coffee cake to our house once more, about 6 months after everything happened, and I made coffee and we sat at the same table and talked about her garden and Felix's promotion and absolutely nothing of substance. I'm fine with that. Some relationships don't survive being honest, and some survive by never being honest, and the trick is knowing which is which. My grandmother was a quiet woman who worked as a bookkeeper for 35 years, lived modestly, and left behind more than anyone expected, because she never stopped paying attention. She put the trust together herself, with an estate attorney, about a year before she died. She told my mother once that money was the thing people lied about most easily and protected least carefully, and that she wanted to make sure I had something that was mine. I think about her sometimes when I'm being tested, when someone's trying to get something from me and dressing it up as something else. I think about the fact that she saw this coming in a general way. That she made arrangements before the crisis, not after. She was right, of course. She usually was. If you're reading this and you're about to get married, or you just got married, or you've been married for 20 years and you've never had the real money conversation with your partner, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I will say this. What you came into this relationship with is yours. An inheritance, a savings account, a property your family left you. That doesn't automatically become a shared asset, and it doesn't become a bargaining chip for anyone else's problems. Know the laws in your state. Talk to an estate attorney, not just once but at major life transitions. And if someone shows up at your door with documents you've never seen before and asks you to sign them without your partner present, the answer is always, always no. The trust is still intact. Felix and I just got back from a long weekend in Asheville. He still remembers how I take my coffee. Some things I held on to. The ones that mattered most were always going to be worth protecting. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if I had signed that document. Not in a dramatic way. I'm not someone who spirals. But sometimes I sit with the quieter version of that question. What if I had wanted so badly to be accepted by Felix's family that I'd overridden everything I knew? What if I had let the coffee cake and the polite smiles convince me that I was being paranoid? I think about Maureen walking into my kitchen with that leather bag, the document already paper-clipped, my name already on the sticky note, and I think about how much preparation that required. That wasn't an impulse. That was a plan. And plans like that don't happen to people who are paying attention. They happen to people who are too busy trying to be liked to notice what's actually in front of them. I wasn't always good at noticing. I spent a long time in my 20s being the kind of person who smoothed things over, who gave people the benefit of the doubt past the point where the doubt had earned it. I learned slowly and sometimes painfully that being perceptive isn't unkind. Seeing someone clearly, really seeing them, not the version of them you want to exist, is one of the most honest things you can do. It's what my grandmother did her whole life. It's what she tried to pass on to me, in the form of a trust. in the form of 35 years of careful, quiet decisions. What happened with Felix's family is, at its core, a story about consequences. Maureen spent months researching my finances, hired professionals to prepare transfer paperwork, and choreographed a visit designed to isolate me from my husband. Every single one of those choices had a cost, not a punishment handed down by anyone, just the natural weight of what happens when you build something on dishonesty. The firm she hired walked away the moment they understood there was no signature coming. The trust was reinforced. Claire's letter was sent. The plan collapsed under its own structure because it was never built on anything real. Felix chose me. Not because I asked him to. Not because I asked him to imment. But because when he saw the full picture, he recognized what his family had done and decided it wasn't who he wanted to be. That's a choice. That's character. And it matters because I think sometimes we forget that people get to keep making choices even after the first wrong thing happens. Felix could have defended his mother. He could have minimized it. He didn't. That tells me something about who he is in the moments that actually count. I think the most important thing I did through all of this wasn't the legal work, as critical as that was. It was the decision to stay clear-headed when everything in me wanted to react. To gather information before I spoke, to protect what needed protecting before I made noise about it. That kind of steadiness isn't something you're born with. I wasn't. It's built, slowly, out of every time you've reacted too fast and regretted it, every time you've held something together through the hardest part and come out the other side intact. My grandmother never made a scene in her life. She just made arrangements. Quietly, carefully, ahead of time. And when the moment came, there was nothing left to take. I try to live like that now. Not perfectly, but deliberately.